welcome folks that have joined, and of course, we'll welcome our guest of honor in a moment. We're about to get started. If you can, if you haven't already, in the chat, if you could throw up your name and where you're tuning in from today, that's enlivening information for us by the fireplace.
Mhm.
And for those of you who don't know me, I think most of you do. My name is Jeremy Smith. I'm a writer, I'm a coach, and I help people reconnect with their innate power and purpose and bring big dreams to life. And I've got this really fun online event series that you're joining where we ask cool, creative people to share their tips, tricks, personal stories, and their magic making. And it is my huge honor to connect with Caverly Morgan today. Caverly is a spiritual teacher, nonprofit founder, speaker and writer who, in my brief but fun experience, swears freely despite or perhaps because she spent 8 years of training in a silent Zen Buddhist monastery. She is the author of The Heart of Who We Are, Realizing Freedom Together, as well as a kid's book about mindfulness, and the founder of Peace in Schools, a nonprofit to create the nation's first for-credit mindfulness classes in public high schools. Caverly lives and is tuning in today, besides our virtual fireplace, on Whidbey Island in Washington State, but leads meditation retreats, workshops, and online classes internationally, which is how I met her taking a weekend workshop she offered with the legendary psychologist Kristen Neff on who is the self in self-compassion. It is a big, heady question, but not a day has passed since I took that workshop that I haven't thought about or used some of the specific teachings and practices Caverly offers. So I'm just thrilled to be able to follow up with her directly and to connect her and her work with all of you. We're going to spend about 20, 25 minutes in one-on-one conversation and then open it up to your questions. Right before that Q&A, I'll share links for more info on her and her events, as well as ways to make contact with us both. So please stay tuned. Caverly, before I start the interrogation, is there any salutations,
Any last
intentions,
requests? Any
any,
last?
yeah,
No.
candle you want to light to sort of clear the space? Yeah.
Tell my family I love them.
Right.
I'm just, as I mentioned when I first came on screen, I'm just delighted to be here. It's always a joy for me to connect with people that I don't know well yet, and I'm just so grateful that you invited me to be in this space. So thank you.
My honor. So I want to start with biography. What was your path to and from being a monk?
Well, it's funny, Jeremy, because I just heard you acknowledge we'll have 20 to 25 to 30 minutes, I think I heard you say, for this part. And I realized, okay, I got to keep this tight because
Mhm.
honestly, there's a very long answer to that, and there's a short answer. And the short answer is that I didn't grow up having pathways that guided me towards the remembrance of who I really am, modeled for me. I didn't, I went to church on Sundays, and actually just the Sundays that were convenient for my mom, or the Sundays. One of the things I mentioned in my book is that I grew up in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the University of Virginia students, my mom took us to church when the students were in town, because she just liked seeing the boys in ties. She just thought that was such a treat. So that's the kind of relationship I had with spirituality. And then I went on my first Zen retreat. Again, if we had longer, I'd fill in more of the gaps. But really, the significant piece is that my first meditation retreat turned lights on that I didn't even know existed. It wasn't like, oh, there's a light, and it's just never been illuminated. It was like I didn't even know that light was in that room. I didn't even know that room was there. So there's something that opened up for me again that I wasn't present to prior. And then following that retreat, I couldn't put it down. I just, it became one of these calls that was very, very alive for me. I started shaping my life around deepening meditation practice. And then at one point I was on a retreat and my teacher said, you know, you can come to the monastery. And I that hadn't occurred to me. And I thought I was going out for a very short practice period. And then 8 years later.
In your book, I mean, you tell that it, I mean, talk about serendipity or really almost accidental. I mean, it's like that a meditation retreat would involve things like meditation or silence was part of like the memo you didn't get. You kind
Oh
of
my
you
gosh.
showed up with like your friends and some bottles of wine and was like,
Oh yeah.
this is gonna be like a camp out, basically.
No, I honestly, Jeremy, it's thoughtful of you to have prepped by even knowing that story because it's true. I was clueless. I mean, I really, again, it's a version of just not even knowing that light was there or that room was there that my friends and I drove down thinking we were going on it was going to be like a conscious party. That's sort of how we were afraid. Like I did not read the fine print about silence. I didn't have a lot of experience with meditation. Certainly, I didn't know we'd be meditating 5 times a day. So it was really eye-opening. And, you know, my friends, I don't think will ever, the friends I went with, I don't think they'll ever go on any kind of trip with me again. That was it for them. They were like, what the hell did we just do? But for me, it just showed me something possible that I hadn't known was possible. And I see that I'm frozen. Am I frozen on your end?
You are, but your voice is coming in.
Okay, let's try this and then
Okay.
let's try coming back on. Okay. Well,
It
I
worked.
was I was really enjoying that fireside experience, but
Well,
Jeremy, something seems to be up with my internet this morning. Okay, let's try this again.
how about it?
Okay,
Okay.
great.
So you go to the conscious party. How many years pass before you are in a monastery?
That's a good question. Probably 3 or 4.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that. I really would have to go back and spend some time counting, but enough time to go on a lot of retreats, enough time to find teachers who were in the same tradition that would have been closer than going out to a monastery in California. I was in Virginia at the time. But I quickly learned that it wasn't just any Zen teacher that I was resonating with. There was a specific connection I had with this particular teacher, and I think one of the connection points was that her approach was quite psychological. She brought in a lot of things in the realm of psychology that many of the other retreats I was trying out didn't bring in, and that was supportive to me at the time.
8 years. Not that that was the plan going in. It sounds like there was a one day at a time, and then a 1 week at a time, and then 1 month at a time, and maybe at some point 1 year at a time.
It was
Well,
actually a 6 month commitment to start. I really thought, oh, this is going to be this deep immersion. And then I'll go out into the world and I'll pursue all these dreams that were alive for me at the time. I'll find my husband, I'll have the kids, I'll get the picket fence. But after 6 months, with trepidation, I chose to stay because I realized I had scratched the tip of the surface of what was possible with this training. And then it was a year commitment. Each year I recommitted for a year.
what was your path from that
Mm.
8 year stay?
That's another long story that I'll make brief. My teacher was clear that it was time for me to leave. It
Okay.
wasn't a comfortable time in my life, but she was right. There was something about the structure of the monastery and the way the teachings were offered that in the beginning of my training I found to be intensely supportive and helpful. And by the end of that experience, it was confining, it was restricting. There was something about the form that I couldn't, I kept pushing against it. And finally, she was like, "You keep pushing against this. There's something, it's as though I had to find out what was possible outside that context. And specifically, I had to give myself permission to challenge the form I'd been in
Mm.
and to challenge the teachings in a different way, to find my own relationship to everything. So it wasn't comfortable, but it was important. It was a very important shift for me.
How many years ago was that?
I left the monastery in about 2007 or 8.
Okay.
Yeah,
So it's been about twice as long on the outside as on
it
the inside.
has.
Okay.
It has. Yeah, it feels definitely like another lifetime at this point
But that
that
was
I
the
was.
the heart of your 20s, I take it, roughly.
Yeah. So I yeah. Hmm.
I'll leave to the Q&A. People can kind of dive into more of that if that's where their interest is. But I want to get into some of the teachings that have been so meaningful to me. In your teachings, you talk about the personal self and the big self. What
Yeah.
is the distinction?
Well, again, my face is frozen. I don't know about if it is for you, but at least it's a little bit more of a pleasant freeze than last time.
What would you prefer? Would you like to pop out
You
into
know,
the other
I
one?
think it would be helpful, Jeremy. I
Yes.
hate to say that.
No, of
I
course, of course.
again, I
No,
was
it's
I
not at
was
all.
in, enjoying that, but I think what this does is it allows me stop video. Yeah, I don't know what's happening with my internet this morning, but I will say, I live on Whidbey Island, and it's one of the gifts of being on the island is I feel removed from the mainland in so many ways. I'm here in the woods, and one of the curses of that is what you're seeing today is when the internet is unstable, the internet is unstable, you know?
All good. Well, let
So,
me,
yeah,
maybe this was even an example of, I'll repeat the question and
great.
you can riff on it as you wish. The personal self and the big self.
Yeah.
What's the distinction?
It is actually a good example. The the personal self is a self that is existing within the reality that says, "Oh my gosh, this is so unprofessional. I am in this context and my internet should be working perfectly, and how is anyone going to take me seriously if I can't even get technology to work right?" Right? That's the self where our sense of self is being reinforced by our self-talk, by our internal dialogue, by all the things that I've been habituated and conditioned to believe. Conditioned, I talk a lot about the conditioned mind. We're conditioned by society, family, friends, and that mind, sometimes I also talk about it as the mind of limitation. When I'm trapped inside that mind and I feel as though that's the totality of reality, there's a sense of limitation that's present. The big self I like to talk about as the self that small mind arises in.
Mm,
That sense of personal self is appearing in a larger context. And I like to make this not too esoteric. We all know that larger context. We know it when we're just being. For some people, they report, when I'm in the zone playing the sport or running, I'm just being, and I have this sense of not being limited to small self. For some people, it feels like something they would define later as a very spiritual experience. I go outside what I thought of as me. I think it's important though to acknowledge that big self is our most primary experience of just being.
mm. in kind of notes, I'm gonna throw this in the chat, see if, that serves people and see if I'm just trying to kind of see if this is a bottom line and maybe this is off and that works too. So, like personal self is like the biographical self. Like I'm from here, these are my parents, this is my job. The narrative self, like I'm succeeding, I'm failing, these are my struggles or triumphs. And it's the self that can suffer. Like my Zoom isn't a good enough connection or something like that.
Exactly.
And the big self's like the container that holds that self, but maybe holds more than that self.
Yes, absolutely. Because the big self, as you wrote in the chat, it's observation without judgment. It's awareness itself. The big self, we normally move through our lives feeling aware of something.
Mm.
I am aware of your face this morning as you speak to me. I am aware of the sounds around me. Big self is when I'm speaking about big self, I'm speaking about the self that we experience ourselves to be when we're just being, which is actually naturally and inherently aware. Just its nature is awareness.
Mm. So my strong guess is there'll be some questions of, okay, I hear those words. How do I get there? How do I feel that? And that's a bit of a transition for my experience with it through you. You offer this really short but very powerful meditation where you lead people in going into a personal self issue to really feel into it and then complete this sentence. So I guess I'll just invite before doing it if others can think about something you're going through. And essentially you were like, I am fill in the blank. I am selfish. I am scared. I am bothering people. I am hungry. I am nervous. I am never going to make this work. Whatever's your sentence that starts with I am. And then we were to picture that whole sentence just sort of in the sky, if I'm remembering it right, and maybe I'm not. And then just letting the part beyond I am fade away. So I am scared, or I am nervous, or I am thinking about lunch, and that sentence being there, and then just the words after I am, and it's just I am,
Mhm.
which is that container. And for me, at least, it was like I am question
Mhm.
mark. I am period. I am exclamation point.
Mhm.
And that was the big self container, which can hold anything
Yeah.
with, and just somehow that visualization, even though it was like with words, was quite opening. For me, I had this like physical shift to this sudden lived in sense of self as a spacious container, like a filing cabinet that could hold any one of those things that follows I am, but the I am was the container, and
Yes.
files would come and go. I guess A, is that in the ballpark of what you were delivering? And B, what are other ways you visualize or help people connect with that big self container?
Mhm. Yeah, well, first, I really appreciate your reflection of how that meditation impacted you. I live to be effective, and I actually haven't had many people say how that
Mm.
meditation lands for them. And it's important to me to hear that your description is precisely what I'm aiming to guide people in having a direct experience of. And again, this direct experience, as you're pointing out, very simply put, is a direct experience of recognizing that we're more than the felt sense of limitation that we normally walk around perceiving ourselves to be. So, all the different ways we identify with a particular identity gets temporarily relieved with a meditation like that. We get to consciously choose being freed from that felt sense of limitation. Whereas for many of us, we only know that felt sense of limitation if it randomly happens. Some people report, I took mushrooms for the first time and that felt sense of limitation disappeared. Some people report, I was making love and that sense of separate self fell away for a period of time. So there are many different ways we can access this, but I'm interested with my line of work. I'm interested in consciously being able to choose it, being able to say, here I am in a moment of difficulty, rather than staying in confined by the mind of limitation. I'd like to choose the remembrance of what's larger. So, to answer your question about how else can we access that, really, any way we can access it in any way that supports I am other than this. I am not my thoughts. I am not the emotions arising in the vastness of me. The only challenge I would offer, Jeremy, to this image of the file cabinet is uh the way in which a file cabinet still, it's like a bigger limitation, but it's still limitation. And that's why I really appreciate that at one point you said sky. The sky has, I think, it's a better metaphor for the vastness of our being. So another way that I might encourage someone to access, big self is to, rather than see yourself as the clouds or the plains or the weather patterns of any kind arising in the sky, to return the attention consciously to the sky.
Right. The cloud doesn't change the sky. The trees that are
Not going
coming up
anywhere.
from the ground don't change the sky. The
Yeah.
house, the plains. Yeah.
Yeah. The open space of space isn't changed by my office arising in open space. When this office, way after I am dead and gone, hopefully, crumbles, is no longer an office, the space will be unchanged.
Yeah. And that just sort of even picturing those sentence like words in the sky, I am in a moment of difficulty or whatever, and just realizing we can put our eyes on the moment I suffering, I am not enough, I am scared, whatever, but we can also make the intention and action to move to I am and just sort of move our gaze from that part of the sentence to the other. And that's kind of moving from the clouds to the sky.
Absolutely. Another practice that I offer regularly is one of picturing a flashlight.
Hmm.
So there's a flashlight picture the end of the beam landing on different objects. It's landing on this bowl that I use in meditation practice. It's landing on the soji screen behind me. It's landing on what I'm hearing. So the beam is the beam of attention. It's landing on different objects. And it's possible for us as a practice to visualize that and then visualize the end of this light beam drawing back into the flashlight itself.
Mm. Mm.
And so rather than the attention landing on another object, the attention's now resting back. The attention's now relaxing into its own source, which is awareness itself.
Mm.
It could be interesting for folks joining us to just try that now. The attention, notice where the attention is going, how it might be bouncing from thing to thing. And then rather than choosing one place for the attention to go or just having it still habitually bounce, let the attention rest. Let it draw back into the vastness of being, into awareness itself.
There's something perfect about doing this via Zoom because you can literally choose self view on or off.
Totally. It's just right.
I have a favorite quote of yours that I've been sharing, and you said this. I'll
I
try to.
hope it's right because you've been sharing it. So,
I know, I know. I'm gonna put it in the chat too, but I'm gonna say it out loud because I know a lot of people will be watching this later. If I say, "What is wrong with me?" there is a whole me that I'm not questioning.
mhm.
If I say, "What is wrong with me?" there is a whole me that I'm not questioning. So again, it's like going from what's wrong with me to me.
Yeah.
So let's stop, let's slow down, and this is my last question for you before the Q&A. The next time I or anyone else says, "What's wrong with me?" how do we stop, turn around, and question the me?
That's a good question. And I'll say, Jeremy, that this really leads, you were curious about, so why, after a practice period at the monastery, did you stay longer? These are the kinds of questions that I realized I used to never question, who am I? I knew who I was. I grew up in Charlottesville, Virginia. I like these things. I want these things. I'm trying to get here in my life. Like, just never questions. Okay, but who's asking all of that? Or
Mm,
dreaming all of that, or proposing all of that, or chasing all of that, or believing that I'm not worthy until I get that, all that stuff. So, yes, for me, it was quite liberating to realize we can turn around. We can say, but yeah, who is that me? And one way to answer your question that we might do that is to notice when we're suffering. Usually, when we're suffering in any form, any kind of struggle, any kind of anxiety, any kind of strain, usually we're not questioning, okay, yeah, but who
mm,
is experiencing this anxiety? We're just caught in the content. The content is, well, I don't have enough money. If you saw my bank account, you'd be anxious too,
yeah.
right? So we're not questioning, okay, yes, there is a reality on the physical plane of existence that my bank account looks this way. I'm not suggesting that's all just illusion. But that sense of self that's tripped up in that conversation, there's something illusory about that sense of self. It feels very real and solid when we're fully identified with it. But if we start exploring it, we realize it's not as solid as we think.
Sometimes I call this the toe, hip, elbow, chin experiment, where it's like, yeah, I don't have enough money. Well, does my toe not have enough money?
That's a great way to explore
Does,
it.
does my hip not have enough money? Does my elbow not, does my, well, who doesn't have enough money?
Who is it?
I guess it's my brain. Is it all of my brain or is it like this part of my brain? And it gets very slippery.
It
Uh,
gets
yeah,
very scary.
I'm doing I'm way behind everybody else. Was my toe way behind? Is my hip? Is my elbow? Who? Of
And Jeremy, can I say something about
course,
why I
of course.
love your experiment so
Mm.
much? That's such a beautiful line of inquiry because then we also get to deduct from that line of questioning. So, and then am I my body?
Right.
Right? Like if I if I lost a toe, am I no longer me? If
Right.
I lost an arm, how much of my body do I have to lose to still say I'm Jeremy?
Yeah. And if it's just my brain, if my brain was in another body, would I still be me? But then if, okay, but what if it's just like half my brain?
Yeah, what has to still exist for you to say, I'm Jeremy? Is it your memories?
Yeah.
Is it your sense of autonomy? What is it?
Mm, mm. Okay, we're going deep. This is the
We're
time
going
for
deep, man.
this is the time. This is the time. Drop the web links. We're gonna go to your questions. Hope so. Get them cooking. Feel free to have them be as biographical or as big as the sky as you'd like. If there's a specific issue you're facing and you'd like counsel or meditation on it, or just perspective or any other points of curiosity, please ready to share those in the chat is often the best way to do that. I want to share quick links to more on Caverly. Her website is caverlymorgan.org, and you go there and you can see her books, online community, and events, including what promises to be an amazing in-person retreat with Kristen Neff in December. And you can also find out more about me and my writing, coaching, and consulting on my website, which is jeremynsmith.com. And at the bottom of that homepage, there's a link to join the newsletter for events like this one. So with that, unless there's something more you want to plug, is that did I kind of hit the main points of entry
Oh,
to?
no, thank you, Jeremy. That's so kind of you. And yes, the December retreat with Kristen is bound to be a good time for sure. I love working with her. We were just talking about the retreat yesterday. And for those that are, well, I see in the chat, not that many are super close to California, but I am teaching at Esalen for a retreat in California in November. So that's going to be a good time as well. So I'll just
Yeah.
mention that one. But I will also say, Jeremy, I really enjoy meeting people on screen if that's an option here. If you want to just type in the chat, that's cool.
Sure.
But I love being able to see facial expressions too, which is why I sometimes just freeze my facial expression. I really am into facial expressions. So, you know.
Awesome. Yeah. So pipe up however suits you in the chat or just by flicking your audio back on. And I think it'll show you on screen or we'll navigate that if not.
Okay, this is SD Yarrow. I'm just gonna
Hi,
just
SD.
hi. Thanks for your today. Um, when you talk about big self and personal self, I have thought about it in different terms too. Absolute reality, historical reality, or sort of like that ebb and flow. Um, Even in the meditation tradition, like I study with the Plum Village tradition, which is to me more based in like the personal how to live a good life, and then there's the whole non-duality traditions that go into, in my opinion, the larger realms of absolute. And I guess I just am so curious with you. For me, it's like I can go to that big self, that absolute, when I'm hiking alone, when I'm gardening alone. Those are like easily accessible places for those larger perspective moments to land with me.
Yeah.
When I am like this morning, getting my 14 and my 11-year-old out the door, my husband's going to work downstairs, I'm taking off for a hike, then doing this, I'm going to work. It is so personal self and it just wrapped up. And that's where all the suffering happens. And I'm just always curious, like, do you live in your big self around other people? Like, do you live in your big self with family? Do you go back and forth? Just that I'm curious about the success of bringing that perspective into the more like nuanced communication and relationships of my life.
Well, and you said it's pronounced SD?
SD, yeah.
SD, it's such an important question because honestly, what are we doing all this for if it's not to have a more peaceful, more joyful, more at ease experience of being alive on this realm, feet on the ground, having kids in the marketplace, as it were. So I would say that your line of inquiry is part of what prompted me to write this book. I wanted to know, okay, there's this absolute, I refer to it in the book as the absolute and relative.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's the absolute. How how often is it the case that I've been seeing the relative plane of experience and the absolute as dualistic, as separate? Like, okay, I got to go on private retreat or silent retreat if I'm going to have this experience of the absolute or any of the other things you mentioned. And then there's this pesky relative plane experience where I'm just trying to live a better life, right? I'm trying to be a little less reactive, a little more responsive. I'm trying to be more mindful. And all those things are great things, as you would agree. I trust. but your question is deep. It's okay, great. I can live a better life. But what does it mean to actually live a life that's more informed by that experience I have over here?
Mhm.
I talk a lot about the difference between bringing practice into your life versus your whole life into your practice. And to me, bringing your whole life into your practice is a new level of depth and commitment to liberation.
Mhm.
It's no longer saying, I just want a little bit more peace in my life. It's saying, I want to know myself as peace, even if a family member is doing something really triggering. Esty, have you ever heard the Ram Dass quote about like, you think you're doing really well in your spiritual practice, go home and visit your family for a week? I
I
mean,
have.
it's something like that. Yeah. It's so good. It's such an important reminder that this is where it happens.
Yeah.
And so, do I get identified with personal self still? Absolutely. And for less and less time
Mm.
than I did when I began. Way less. I mean, it used to be like days at a time, or maybe even weeks at a time. It's a really empowering thing. I like to speak to the importance of practice from the perspective
Mhm.
of naming that it is possible to recognize identification with small self or personal self or limited self and disidentify consciously.
Mhm.
And then that's like any muscle
Mhm.
that is built. I mean, just to use a very mundane example, you can see that this conversation would have gone very differently if I'd gotten really identified with that small personal self sense of, oh my God, my technology's messing up. This is terrible. This shouldn't be happening. It could have thrown my entire conversation with Jeremy. It's not magic. It's not esoteric. It's not some special gift I have. It's nothing even profound that I can notice that self-talk and then come back to just resting in presence with Jeremy as we continue our conversation. It's That's just a simple example of practice in action.
Yeah. Lovely. Thank
It's
you.
not heroic, and I think it's important to dismantle that idea, because I think when we're conditioned to perceive the relative and the absolute as very separate, we're conditioned to think we're only going to have this absolute experience once, once we've been in a monastery for 8 years. That's not required. It's actually just the practice itself, not deep immersion with no distraction, that I credit knowing how to disidentify with more ease too.
That's lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming on screen. It's nice to see you. Hi, Neil.
Um, Hi, thank you so much. Good to see everybody. Actually, just as a follow-up on the end of your response there, maybe could you tell us a bit about, so if, as you're saying, so much of the work is to be done in everyday life and in relation with our friends and family and others, can you tell us what specifically you did get out of the long immersion and when that would be the appropriate thing to do?
Well, Neil, that's a beautiful question. To me, the appropriate time for long immersion is when your heart is on fire. with wanting to rest in deep immersion. To me, moving into deep immersion because you feel that it's the only way to experience enlightenment is where things can go astray. And I'm not suggesting that's a confusion place for you, but I think a lot of people feel like I can't deepen my spiritual practice unless ... And that's what I like to dismantle, because I don't think it serves people. But if you feel called to say, practice is the most important thing in my life right now, and I can set other aspects of the relative plane world aside to go deep, then by all means, go deep. Again, I think we can go deep in our everyday lives, but we do, I think, need to structure our lives in such a way that we're supported in remembering what's true and real and who we are. And most of our conditioned world doesn't reflect back to us what's real and true and who we really are. So that's, I think, one of the things I received from unplugging in that way. I mean, mine was a dramatic unplug. I didn't have an email account. I actually let go of all ties. Aside from I kept in contact with my mom once a week. But that was it. I really said, this is what I'm pursuing. I was very, very serious about it, and I was very disciplined. Part of what that taught me that was helpful for me was the power of discipline. I now, in my teachings, focus a lot on releasing, relaxing, letting go, undoing. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge how much focusing on being able to train my attention where I wanted it to be helped me. Being able to move into a task that was assigned to me by the monastery, even though everything in me said, but I don't want to do that task. Knowing how to move past that conditioned voice and do it anyway was empowering. And I never would have done something like that. I would have always chosen comfort if I hadn't had that kind of training. And that serves me now.
Mm. Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are you, Neil, I have to ask, are you considering a deeper immersion or focused period of training or practice? Is that where your question arises from?
Not necessarily in terms of something like the kind of meditation commitment that you're discussing, but I mean I have a tendency sometimes to, with work of various kinds, or including work on myself, but also work, isolate and go off and then to be very effective at things. But I also feel like sometimes it is an excuse to not deal with people and relationships and some of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, what you're making me think of, Neil, is just the importance of paying attention to the how and not just the what. It's never to me just about the content. It's about the process. And so I could go into a retreat and my process might be, I have to do this in order to become the right spiritual person. And that's going to affect the whole retreat. I could go into a deep immersion with work, but it's all the process piece of it is avoidance of everything relational. And that's going to affect my experience. So to me, the richness is in paying attention to process, not content, and to the how and not just the what.
Great question.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, wow, I guess, are at the end of this band of time. I hope that those of you with follow-up questions follow up and proceed to more experiences with Caverly and her a wonderful book, The Heart of Who We Are, and that this is a, continuing inquiry. What was coming to mind for me was certainly, yeah, it's this sort of, you can leave the monastery, but you can also make wherever you are that zone of practice.
Absolutely.
So we've got many monasteries on this call with that in mind. I want to thank everyone so much for coming. Caverly for joining us, Jana, her amazing assistant that facilitated so much of the logistics behind the scenes of getting us together. And I want to give Caverly the last word here. Give us a, how would you send us off for this particular conversation?
Perhaps just with the reminder that it's possible to remember who we are and live that in our everyday lives. You know, as Estee and I were talking about, we don't have to see this relative plane existence as separate from our very being, from the absolute or from the totality of who we really are, the expansiveness of, as you brought in, Jeremy, the sky.
Mm.
So thank you.
You are welcome. Thank you. I'm looking out past the screen, past the camera, and indeed there is a sky, and indeed there are clouds. So I guess I'm in some of them, and then right behind that is more sky. So thanks for sharing the sky with us today. Thanks for everyone watching this later on YouTube, and have a wonderful and conscious and expansive weekend, all.
Thank you all. So delighted to be here. Thank you.